A productive lifestyle.
Press the button.
I did.
Sorry.
It's okay. My name is David Needham. I am a developer advocate at Pantheon. The thing that I really love about being a developer advocate is that I get to, well, first of all, come to camps and cons just like this, but also it means that my job is to help developers find success, to have more pleasant sort of responsibilities of their job when possible, automating things that are really difficult or tedious. And so basically my job is to help developers be happy with their jobs, which also makes me happy. And then I also have a few other things up there that I enjoy, including biking, playing board games, and volunteering whenever possible. So about a year ago, I presented here, I think it was actually in the room right next door here, on the Ivy Lee method. And it was the session name was Peak Productivity with Ivy Lee. Real quick, who was here for that session last year? Okay, good. So a few people were here. This is not that session. There are some similarities, but I want to give you an update on what's happened since I presented on that last year. Before I do that though, let me start just by telling you a little bit about Ivy Lee and the Ivy Lee method. I'm not going to go into as much detail as I did last year. So if this kind of resonates with you, if you want to learn more, if you want to hear the actual story of how Ivy Lee's method came to be, then I highly encourage you to check out the session from last year where I go into much more detail. So the whole point of the Ivy Lee method is that you should write down the 6 most important things that you need to do tomorrow. You write those down at the end of your workday. You then sort those things in order of priority so that when you start your day, you start at the thing that's most important and kind of work through the list. And that's the very next one. You just kind of go through the list from start to finish, working on just the first one until it's done, just the second one until it's done. And then at the end of the day, you move any unfinished items to a new list. You consider if they're still important, and you start over. And you basically just keep going every single day. So, a year ago when I presented this, I honestly felt kind of the best that I've ever felt about my level of productivity, about my job satisfaction, about how I was accomplishing my tasks. And it was in part, it was actually mostly because of the Ivy Lee method. The method was working for me. It was really good. And as a result, I was getting more things done. But eventually, it failed. And for me, when it failed pretty hard. When the Ivy Lee for me broke down, I was depressed. I had anxiety because I reached the end of my workday and I did not do the things that I knew that I was supposed to be doing that day. And I was, crankier with my wife and kids. I was like, there's all sorts of repercussions that come from just not being, kind of getting those things done that I knew that I needed to get done. But I wouldn't blame the Ivy Lee method. The Ivy Lee method was working. I changed. Something about me and the way that I was approaching it was different. And I didn't have a plan in place to actually address that. I did not have a contingency plan on what will happen when this stops working for me, or if I change, or if my life changes. And so part of this is that, not having a contingency plan in place. Then part of it is also, it's difficult to consistently make myself do the things that I know that are important to me. So let me do a quick thing. I would maybe write these up on the board, but then it'd be lost on the recording and all that stuff. So let's just maybe shout some things out. What are some things that you guys know that are important to you that you want to do every day or every week? They're like pretty big things. It doesn't have to be a big thing, actually. It could be even small things like flossing every day.
Reading a book.
Reading a book. What else?
Exercise.
Exercising is a very good one.
Take a walk.
Taking a walk. Yep.
Call friends you haven't talked to in a while.
Yep, that's very good. Calling friends you haven't talked to in a while. Yep.
Honor commitments that are lower priority.
Yes, honoring commitments that are lower priority. That's a very good one. Yeah, there's a lot, and they vary a lot from person to person, too. A few more are, like, I mentioned, like, brushing and flossing, like going to the gym, or, like, doing yoga on a regular basis, or whatever that is for you. For me, like, prayer is really important to me. It helps me kind of stay centered. For other people, maybe meditation or something like that to help you make sure that you're in the right place. Studying for a test if you're a student, or even if you're not necessarily a student, but also like I was trying to think of like what the modern, like my version of studying for a test would be, and I realized it's sort of like balancing your budget. Like, nobody really likes to balance their budget. Well, some people do, but it's something we all know that we should do. We just don't. Also, when I used to work for myself, for whatever reason, I don't have an explanation, I found it really difficult sometimes to actually invoice for the work that I've been doing.
That's a huge obstacle for me.
Yeah, I know. Some people, I don't know what it is, like getting paid is obviously a really good thing, but for some reason, like it's just not something I ever looked forward to. So, another thing that's a little bit more emotional is being willing to ask for forgiveness. Like when you know that you've done something wrong to someone, actually going out and telling them that you did something wrong and asking for that. Also, if you have a sort of strained relationship, being the first person to break that silence, to reach out and reestablish those relationships. So these are some of the things that I've kind of talked through and thought through about, like things that we know that we should do that we don't want to do. And for some reason, the things that we know that we should be doing, the things that we know that are important to us, are just really hard to do consistently. And I don't claim to have all of the answers, but I have some ideas why. So some reasons why actually, let me turn it over to the audience real quick, to you guys. What are some reasons why you may not do some of those things we just mentioned that are really important to you?
Distracted by work emergencies.
Yeah, distracted by work emergencies. That's good. Tired. Habits. Or not having habits.
Right.
Yep. Well, either one. Yeah.
This is a conversation I have with people very frequently, and it's like your first response is, I don't have time, and then they say you have to make time, and you know that that's true, but in the flow of the day, like I'm not even thinking about that. I'm just like putting out one fire after another, and at the end of the day I'll realize, you know what, I don't think I got up from my chair for more than 5 minutes at a time today.
Yep, I can definitely relate to that too. Yep, so I've come up with some categories, and I don't think that this is quite everything, but for me, most of the things that we've talked about fit into some of these categories. One of them is having the wrong priorities. So for this is kind of a little bit what you were saying, like, I'm too busy to do this thing. I don't have time for this thing that's really important because I have this work emergency, or I have this other thing that I'm doing. I would also lump being too tired into this, because if you are too tired, it's probably because you're not prioritizing sleep, or not prioritizing rest, or whatever mental recharge time over the things that you think you're too busy to do. And the sort of inverse of that is procrastination. If you're procrastinating, then your priorities might be a little out of whack. The next category is shame or fear, and this is a little bit where the emotional part of it, like asking for forgiveness and things like that. The other day, I was having not a great day. It was kind of stressful, and we're kind of reaching the end of the day, and I was with my family and my daughter, and she'd been working hard, kind of going through her chores and all that stuff. And at the end of the day, I yelled at her. I was angry with her, not because she did anything wrong, just because I was not in a great place at the time. And like as she was going to bed, she wasn't happy and I wasn't happy. And I realized what some friends had, kind of reassured me with and helped me with, and thinking like it's important that I go out and actually apologize and like admit fault, just not only for me but also for her to have that sort of example. And so it was really, really hard. But I went and talked to her, and she was in bed already, not asleep. And so I went and talked to her, and I just said, "Hey, I'm sorry," and I explained, and she said she forgave me, and it was all just a very good, very great feeling. But there is shame, there's some fear about that, and also a little bit of fear of, generally, fear of change, because change can be really scary. What happens if you change? What happens if you actually change? Like not just surface level change, but you as a person change. That's can be really scary. And then also people might notice if we show some weakness from admitting guilt or fault, or If we take responsibility for something, there can be some sense of like, what if I get fired? What if so-and-so sees me as not as strong as I need to be, or something like that. I think there's also forgetfulness. And part of this is forgetfulness on like not remembering to do, just simply not remembering to do something, but also not remembering why something is important to us. So for me, when I was doing the Ivy Lee method, when I had the system down that really worked, I was getting up at 5 a.m. When I was trying to jumpstart back into the Ivy Lee method and kind of restart something for me, I felt like it was important for me to get up at 5 a.m. because I got a lot of stuff done in the morning and it led to a much more productive day. But I couldn't. I would set my alarm for 5 a.m., I'd wake up, and I'd be like, okay, why am I up at 5 a.m.? Like, can I just go back to sleep? And if I can't think of the reason why I'm getting up at 5 a.m., in the next 3 seconds, I'm going to turn off my alarm and go back to sleep. I lump that under forgetfulness. I'm not keeping at my present mind why I'm doing the things that I'm doing. And then also, there's immaturity. I'm using this as sort of a catch-all because for me, the situations where you don't have any logical explanation for why you don't necessarily do the things that you want to do. Sometimes there's no explanation for it, but when I've shared with some friends and tried to like talk through some of the stuff, they've shared that like a similarity to like, oh, I don't do this thing consistently, so but over time, like, it's easier with, as you grow and as you work on it. So, immaturity. As you mature, as you grow, as you keep at it and establish habits, those things will get better and easier. All right, so next up, we're going to talk a little bit about the Pareto principle. So, we're not going to go into this into a ton of detail, but the Pareto principle is the kind of like the 80-20 rule, if you've ever heard of that. The gist of it is that Pareto noticed all around him that in many cases 20% of one thing leads to 80% of the other thing. So, for example, I think he was in his garden, he was growing peas, and he noticed 20% of the peas that he was growing was responsible for 80% of the growth. For some reason, the small segment of his peas were just booming. He also looked at his land and noticed, 20% of the people in the land, in his country, own 80% of the actual, farmland and all that stuff. And he saw this happening over and over again. It does happen over and over again. And part of this has to do, my biggest takeaway from this, the 80-20 rule, is that continuous improvement is something that can give you a significant advantage over other people, over competition, over kind of yourself and whatever goals you're trying to meet. And the interesting thing about continuous improvement is that you don't have to jump into a significant. You don't have to go from 20% efficiency up to 80% efficiency. You just start with like 1% or 0.5%. You just do a little bit, and you do it incrementally every day over time, and it builds upon itself and becomes something that is significantly better than the other options. So some examples of how you see this in the real world. Plants compete for the same resources. So the whole thing with the peas, he noticed, and you can see this with other trees in the forest, for example, that are growing. A tree that suddenly grows just a tiny bit more than the other trees, has slightly more surface area on the leaves, gets slightly more sun, which leads exponentially to slightly more growth, which gives them even more advantage. So that's why you end up with trees in the forest. If the plants are growing, some of them will be a little bit taller and the other ones around it will be shorter. That's the 80-20 rule and continuous improvement in place. Also, politicians competing for the same votes. Once a politician is elected into office, people know the name of the politician, they're much more likely to get reelected, regardless of if they were good or bad. A known name is better in this case. Authors compete for the bestseller list. Once a best-selling author becomes a best-selling author, they do better at selling books, and as a result, they sell more books, just from simply being on the list. And these things happen over again. Athletes competing for the gold medal, companies competing for the same client. Once you win a client bid, you get more resources, and all these things. You can put it on your portfolio, and leads to more people coming to you. TV shows competing for the same hour on TV. You probably all have a favorite TV show that's been canceled at some time. In some cases, there might be a really crappy show on at the prime time, but some new show that's really interesting is at a time that's not peak hours, and so people don't watch it, so ratings are low, so it gets canceled. So there's this quote here by Aristotle, and this is actually my favorite quote. Aristotle says, "We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, therefore, is not an act, but a habit." So the reason why this is my favorite quote is because it reminds me that I need to have patience. It reminds me that I need to trust in incremental improvement over time. It reminds me that it's not possible to just become an expert in something overnight or to become better at something instantly. If I could help mentally kind of like look at this, I'm actually going to remove the word excellence and fill in the blank. What do you want to become? If someone asked me, "Hey, are you a guitar player?" I could say, "Sure, give me a guitar." And I don't know how to play guitar, but hey, I can play a guitar. But if I practice the guitar every day, even if it's just 10 minutes, doesn't matter how much it is, I will continually get better and better. And so we all repeatedly do. Becoming a good guitar player, therefore, is not an act, but a habit. You could say the same for being a developer or a project manager, or losing some weight, or whatever the things that are important to you, whatever those things are. It's not about finding the secret strategy. It's not about finding buying the latest product or the get rich quick scheme or the diet pill or any of those things. It's about every day doing a little bit that gets you a little bit closer and improves and gets you closer to the goals that you're trying to achieve. So one step towards this is actually using one of the other strategies I talked about, the Seinfeld strategy. So the whole thing with the Seinfeld strategy, and again, I go into a long story about how this came to be in my talk last year, and you can go watch that if you want to learn more about how this came to be. But basically, you set out to do something every day, whatever this thing is, this new habit that you're trying to establish. Once you have defined what that is, you get a big calendar, big wall calendar sort of thing. You put it up on the wall, and you get a Sharpie, and every day that you do that thing, you go to the calendar, and you put a big X on the day that you did it. And you do this day after day after day. And then the whole point of this becomes not breaking the chain. So you'll go through and you'll do it, and you might have a couple misses, and that's okay. But eventually you'll reach a point where you've got a week. You have a streak that's a whole week of X's on your calendar. And then you get 2 weeks. And then the game becomes not, I really need to do this thing today because it's important to me. It becomes like, I don't want to break this chain. It's a visual reminder that you can see up on the board and help motivate you, not just because it's important to you, but because you're almost kind of tricking your mind at that point into gamifying it and it becoming an important thing. It helps you also measure your progress towards meeting your goals and being establishing the habit. Yeah, the most important thing at this point is to just make sure that you do this thing, this continuous improvement, this little bit of whatever this thing is. And I was in Dwayne's session yesterday, and he had this slide, and I had to take a picture of it. If you can't measure it, you can't improve it. And I'm going to second his disclaimer that I don't know if that actually came from him, Lord Kelvin, or not, but it's an appropriate quote nonetheless. If you can't measure the things that you're trying to do, then you're not going to have any way to tell if you actually improved it or not. And so the Seinfeld strategy, the checking the boxes, shows you over time how you're doing. Are you actually accomplishing the things that you set out to do for the day? So Let's start by asking yourself, coming up with these important things. What are the most important things to you? What do you want to do every single day? So you go through, you create this list, and you ask yourself a few questions. And these can help define or help you prioritize this list and decide which things are going to make the cut for your final list and which things maybe you'll just not worry about right now. So you can ask yourself, why is this important thing actually important? Why is it important that I floss my teeth every day? You can also ask yourself, what will this thing change for the positive or for the negative? If I start taking time out of every day to plan the next day, what good things will come from this? Start thinking about those, write those things down. Also the negative. Will any negative repercussions come from this change, this important thing happening to you? How will this change actually affect other people? If you start setting out to do these important things, what will other people say or think or feel, or how will these affect other people? And then what will you actually do when you meet your goal? Whatever this important thing is, what will you actually do when you get there and it becomes something you do on a regular basis? One of my colleagues, Sean Livermont, is a project manager at Pantheon, and he pushes back on me a lot when we're setting out to start a new project or defining the goals of a project. One of the things that's really stuck with me that he asks is this question, basically, like what will actually happen if we do what we say we're going to do, or what will actually happen if the user that's going through this process does what we ask them to do? And at the end of the day, if the answer is not really anything, it's not going to do anything different, it's not going to cause any significant change one way or the other, then it's probably not worth our time actually doing it. This comes up more often than you might expect, but it's important to think about this as you're going through these things that are important, because maybe it's important to you, but when you think about it, if it doesn't actually cause any change at the end of the day, then it might be worth removing from your list. So once you've defined some of the things that are actually important to you, next you can start to think about a habit. In this case, I'm sort of advocating for a single new habit, just one thing that you can establish as a habit to do every day that will just sort of encourage the things that are important to you to happen. So it helps, of course, if the things that that are important to you are sort of related in some way or something, but that's not always the case. So for me, if we go through some of the important things to me, as I was going through this process, as I was recovering from falling from the Ivy League method just as it was, I started thinking about the things that are important to me, and some of them I carried over from the Ivy League. But the first thing is just getting up at 5 a.m. I noticed when I got up at 5 a.m., I got some work in before my wife and kids woke up. As a result, I felt much like kind of ahead as I was going throughout the day. And it just made me feel really good, getting up and getting my morning coffee. The next one here is reading my Bible and praying. I'm a Christian, and I noticed as I was going through the days that I did this, it helped me to be better prepared for the sorts of stresses and things that came up throughout the day. I felt like I was able to respond to anxiety and all the different things that came up. For you, they could be very different things. It could be meditation or something else. I actually did an experiment on some of my colleagues, and I told them up front it was an experiment, so it's okay. But I asked them to take, I forget now if it was 5 minutes or 10 minutes, but take, let's just say 5 minutes. Turn off your phone, turn off your computer, sit in a room where you're not going to have any interruptions, just like quiet, and just try to like clear your mind a little bit. And it sounds a little like meditation-y, but if you just try to clear your mind, but you have a notepad next to you with a piece of paper and a pencil or something like that, and be willing to sort of, if things come to mind, just write them down. That process can often lead to a sense of calm and preparedness that is pretty good. So that's another technique. I think there's probably something, I haven't researched what the name of what that particular technique is, but that can be a technique that can help people kind of prepare for the day and make sure they got all their bases covered. The next one here is saying my affirmations. So there's things that help me prepare for the day to remind myself the things that are important to me. So why I do the work that I do at Pantheon, the importance of my family, things like that are just good for me to say out loud and help remind me of my priorities and my goals. Also picking tomorrow's tasks. So this is kind of a carryover from Ivy League, but I get more work done and I'm more productive when I think about the things I'm doing tomorrow and I actually go through a list and pick them. So these are all things that are important to me, things that I would like to do every single day. And so I asked myself, what is the one habit that would make all of these things easier? And initially I thought the habit was getting up at 5 a.m. When I get up at 5 a.m., I have the time to do all of these things that I want to do. And so that's when I went back and said, okay, I'm going to wake up at 5 a.m. I wake up at 5 a.m. Why am I up at 5 a.m. again? Nope, go back to bed. I tried and failed continuously to actually get up at 5 a.m. And so I took a step back and I thought, okay, getting up at 5 a.m. is obviously not, it's not the goal, the habit that I'm trying to establish. So rather than make that the goal, I made a goal to go to bed at 9 p.m. every day. I picked a number that would give me plenty of time. It would set me up to be able to get up at 5 a.m. just a little more naturally. I'd feel more rested. It puts my priorities a little bit in place as well. It helped focus my evening in a way that I didn't expect also. And then but before this, I was I would be working or reading or playing or a game or something into the evening. Often I'd be doing a little bit of just stuff on my computer or whatever. And I would get into a groove of, I'm doing this good work and stuff. And then before I realized it would be 2 or 3 in the morning. And then my kids would wake up at 6:30 regardless. And at that point, I have to get up. So regardless of what time I go to bed, I have to get up at 6 or 7 or whatever time. So going to bed at 9 p.m. Set me up to be successful in these other things and put me in a good position to get these things done. So when I was thinking about how to do this, how to go through and actually establish this habit and make it important to me, I thought of another strategy that I've been working on before. There's a book called Get Clients Now, and it's a book where you go through and it's focused on business and sales and marketing and those things. But you basically go through and you, this is an old chart, but this was up on my wall. And as far as sticking with something goes, I felt like I stuck with it for a pretty long time. This chart worked pretty well. It helped me define all these different things. But I'm only really trying to establish one habit. I'm trying to get better at one particular thing. So rather than this, which requires a lot of going through the book and reading this chapter and that chapter and writing my plan out, I instead created this chart. So this chart here is broken up into 5-week, so it's week 1 through 5 here. A habit typically takes 10 weeks or so to establish, to become automatic in your life. So I thought, okay, 5-week chunks here. I'll do 2 of these charts, and then if I do it every single time, every single week, then it's going to be automatic. I'm not going to have to think about it. It's just going to happen, and that'll be easier. So let's actually break this down. Let's take a look. So the top here is the habit. It's a little bit hard to see, but there's a section here at the top where you just write your habit in, and then every day as you go through, you either check it off or you don't. Below here, you have a section for notes, which I think is useful for reminding yourself why this is important to you. Why are you trying to establish this habit? And then as you go through, there will probably be days where you don't do your habit, or maybe you do and it's really hard or whatever. This bottom area here is really just a place to write in a note to remind you why something. The whole point, I was coming to this thinking like this is going to be really flexible. Like I'll figure out as I go. I'm just going to go into Excel or Google Sheets and just make this sheet so I can start tracking. Yep, you can go in here, add notes, do whatever you want. The bottom section is a section that I'm calling the daily incidentals. So I was going through and I was blogging about this process I was going through and the struggle and the trying to bounce back into something new and establishing this new habit. And I realized like the things that are important to me are important, but my only goal is to get up at to go to bed at 9 p.m. So that's the only thing I'm really concerned about. Everything else that happens in this section here is incidental. It's secondary to the habit that I'm trying to establish. So this isn't my goal, but these are all things that are really important to me. And if I focus on my goal, these things should happen as a result. At least that was my theory. So how did it go? Well, this is the first week. There were some goods, there were some bads. And so if we break this down a little bit, I added in my goal here at the top, added check marks along the top for the days that I actually did it. The zeros, or the O's in this case, are times that I didn't quite meet the 10 p.m. time, but I had a really good reason, or I was being accountable to my wife at this point, and if she agreed that it was also a good reason, then everything was okay. So for example, I'm on the MidCamp organizing team, and the MidCamp meeting starts at 8, and we often went until 9:30, 10 o'clock, something like that. So in those cases, I had an O and I wrote in, MidCamp meeting. So there is a time here where I'm in San Francisco, and I kind of knew this coming into it, but it's really, really highlighted here for me that when I travel, it is really, really hard for me to establish a habit. In fact, I actually don't know if this plan is going to work for me and my lifestyle because I travel about once a month, which means I'm never going to have a 10-week stretch to establish a habit and make that automatic. I don't quite have an answer for this yet, so I'd love feedback. Maybe we can talk a little bit afterwards, but I'm still trying to figure out what to do when I travel. In this case, I was in San Francisco. It was a team retreat. I knew I wasn't going to go to bed at 9 p.m. In fact, I wasn't even planning on it because I was there to be with my colleagues. We're going to play some board games. We're probably going to be up pretty late, and that's okay. Like that's the point of the retreat. So I don't know. I tried to establish it as less like this is a failure week, and more as a I'm going to like. Kind of like if you have a recurring task on your calendar, it's something that you do every week, but I'm traveling this week, but it's on my calendar for next week. It's something I'll pick up as soon as I start the following week. And that worked okay. The following week was still hit and miss, but let's jump to the bottom. So the bottom here, I have my daily incidentals, the things that I'm trying to set up to do. Those are all listed there. I was also curious on what days that I would read. It wasn't necessarily one of my important things, but I was just kind of curious. I'd been reading a lot, so I marked that. I added that as an extra thing. And then again, the goal of this is to be flexible and kind of customized to what I'm trying to track. And so I also added a section here for sets of push-ups. So every time that I would do a set of push-ups, I would add a little tally there, and as you can see, I am awesome at doing push-ups. Yeah. But it was something good for me to track. And then the bottom section here is how I feel both mentally and physically. And I don't know if anything significant will come out of that, but I think there could be some interesting data on like, the days that I get up at 5, I feel better, or something. But at the very least, it's good for me to kind of be aware of how do I feel today in relation to yesterday. It helps. But yeah, again, the whole point of this is to be flexible. You could build this into kind of whatever you want, and make whatever sort of plan you want. If this is something that's interesting to you, if you want to give it a try, I do have some printouts that you guys can take with you, and it is also available on my website, davidneedham.me, and I've been blogging about it. You can download that, and again, if it's useful for you, please feel free to use that. So the whole point of what I'm trying to get at for today is not to tell you this is the way to do it. not to tell you the Ivy Lee method is the way to become productive. I think it's a way to become productive. It's a way to become productive for a while. But I don't think that it's the end-all and be-all solution. What I'm trying to help you guys with today is the process I went through to create this plan. It's really about setting yourself up for success, for thinking about the things that are important to you, to think about habits, and to help yourself to succeed at establishing those habits. So let's talk a little bit about building your own plan. These are some of the headings that we're going to talk through, so let me jump right in. So the first one here is that there's no silver bullet. There's no one technique that's going to do it all for you. There's not like a one-size-fits-all solution that's going to be appropriate for every single person. So personally, I have done some personality tests. I'm in ENFJ on the Myers-Briggs, and I'm a specialist on the DISC assessment. Part of what I learned about myself in doing those tests is that I'm very detail-oriented. I like to have a plan. I like to follow through that plan. And if I deviate from the plan, it is difficult for me to jump back into it. So knowing that about myself, some of these strategies will work better than others. After the Ivy Lee method, some of my colleagues were interested in kind of picking it up, and it didn't really resonate with them, and I didn't really know why. I thought, oh, well, I must just be like kind of failing at explaining it the right way. I just need to explain it again, or I need to show them my work or something, and that will help. But we actually did a personality test during our retreat, and it was really interesting to see just how different groups of people process things in different ways and think about things differently and work in very different ways. So things that work for me may not work for you, and that's okay. The important thing is finding something that you feel like will work for you and trying to adapt that. So some things you can ask yourself, like when someone's talking about, oh, this new productivity strategy, or as I'm going through and talking about these productivity strategies, ask yourself, what parts of this technique can I use? Like, which parts are actually like, oh yeah, that resonates with me, and which parts are like, I don't, that's not going to do anything. And then also think about, if you currently have a strategy or a plan in place, like, what do I want to try next time? You know, maybe I'm really focused on this thing and it's working pretty well, but let me write this down and, I'll iterate on that later. Also, personalization I think is really important. I think it's important to find a plan, to create a plan that is personal and unique to you, to specifically the things that you're trying to do. Some things that come up with this is, for example, like asking yourself, how strict do I need to be to make this actually happen? So for me, going to bed at 9 p.m., I found that I needed to be pretty strict with myself. Recently I've been failing a little bit more at that than I had at the beginning, and part of the reason is because I grew a little bit lax. Like, oh, it's 9:05. I'm gonna go ahead and finish the chapter in this book that I'm reading, and then I'll go to bed. And that just led to didn't go well. So I found out I have to be a little bit more strict with myself on, it's 9 p.m. Well, I'm not at the end of my chapter, but I need to turn off the Kindle. I need to go to sleep because that's important. Also, for some people who have dieted, there's this thing about like cheat days that it's okay to eat the ice cream, or it's okay to have that chocolate cake or whatever. For me, I don't think that would work. I think if I had a cheat day, it'd be really easy to have every day a cheat day. But for some people, they can do that, and that works. Also, how will you motivate yourself not to fail? What things will you set up for yourself to keep yourself from falling off? Do you need to give yourself a reward for completing a particular milestone? For my first week, I got all of the check marks on the first week. Part of the reason I think is because I set out a reward for myself, where there's this video game called RimWorld that I'm really into right now. I didn't own it at the time, but I saw my friends playing it. It looked like a lot of fun, and I said, okay, if I can get through and do it perfectly this 1 week, then I'll go ahead and get that for myself, and then that motivated me. That first week was the hardest, and it was great to have that motivation there. Also, what sorts of accountability do you need to have? What level of accountability is appropriate for making sure that you follow through on the things that you want to do every day? Does this need to be public? accountability or private accountability, or some mixture of both. For me, I blogged publicly about my challenge to myself, so I was inviting the public to kind of be aware of my success or failure, which motivated me to try to succeed. Also, I reached out to some friends, and I said, asked them to ask me about how things were going on a regular basis, which was good. Ultimately, just you know yourself better than I do. You know yourself better than Ivy Lee, who hasn't been around for a while. So think about it, customize it, personalize it to what you're trying to do. And then adapt. Things will change. Your life will change. You'll get a new job. You'll have kids. You'll move. You'll get a new car. I don't know. There's all sorts of things that change in your life. It could even be little things. You change your morning routine. You start riding a bike. I don't know. There's all sorts of things that can change. But the important thing is to be flexible in your plan. Be prepared to adapt to whatever the changes that you are having, and make a plan so that you can adapt and get back on track with something else. It's okay to change your plan. And then also don't be afraid to stop something that isn't valuable anymore. If you're going through and you review your goals and you realize this really isn't what I thought it would be, it's okay to stop and come up with new goals. But in the end, you can expect failure. You're going to eat the donut, or I'm going to eat the donut. And that's okay. No plan is intended to be perfect. No plan is going to last forever. People will change, things will happen, and that's okay. But when it happens, ask yourself why it happened. Don't just say, oh, I failed, this sucks, I'm just gonna not do anything anymore. Ask yourself why it happened. Actually, take a look at it. Ask yourself what you could have done to avoid that from happening in the first place. Is there anything you could change about your strategy to actually keep it from happening the next time? And then also review your goals. Consider the things that you thought were important to yourself. And then if you can, make a contingency plan. This is something I'm still working on. What will happen when the plan that I'm on right now totally fails? What will I do to keep myself from becoming totally unproductive and anxiety and depression, all that stuff again? I don't have a plan for that yet. And that's something I need to work on myself. And then I was reading a book, and one quote stood out for me in that, and that they said, sometimes we need to stumble in order to keep ourselves from falling. So it's like if you're walking along, sometimes you need a little stumble to keep yourself from actually falling on the ground. I think that applies here too. Sometimes it's okay to have a few hiccups, to have a little bit of things happen, if it reminds you and gives you a chance to basically grow, to use the opportunity for failure. Use the opportunity of something not working to give yourself a stronger, more vibrant, more efficient plan. And with that, I'm going to open up to Q&A. Yes?
Not really a question, just a comment. I think I would avoid personally using the word failure, because that's part of that flexibility. So that particular approach might not have reached the end point you were hoping for. So rather than say, oh, I failed, I better find something else, it's like, it's time to shift direction, it's time to, to try something new or whatever. Because, if you go into something saying, I know the point will come where I will fail, then why do it anyway, And maybe that's just me.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you. I appreciate that feedback. All right. Well, thank you all very much.